Silence had always seemed like a priceless gift to me, especially after the exhausting years I spent working double shifts at the diner, practically raising Owen single-handedly while Ethan built his empire. I learned to greedily snatch those rare moments when his voice wasn't echoing through the house, sharp, commanding, always with a hint of veiled dissatisfaction. But that Friday morning was eerily quiet. Ethan rushed around, muttering something about his mother's fluctuating blood pressure and how she needed someone who cared. He barely brushed my cheek with a kiss before he bolted out the door. The rumble of his suitcase wheels on the porch steps sounded like the crack of a starting pistol. You'd think I would have breathed a sigh of relief, but instead I froze in the kitchen, clutching my coffee mug, watching the steam rise into the air like the last breath of a dying animal. It wasn't until Owen walked in, clutching his mangy stuffed fox, and whispered, "Mom, we need to run," that a chill ran through me. There wasn't a trace of a smile on his face. I crouched down in front of him, brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "Sweetheart, what do you mean?" He glanced over his shoulder, his gaze darting nervously towards the hallway. "Come on," he whispered. "I found something. You're not going to like it." Kids' games, monsters in the closet, swords made of mops. I tried to convince myself it was just an innocent prank. Maybe he'd stumbled upon some old Halloween props, or one of Ethan's creepy hunting knives. But when he led me to the garage, to Ethan's inner sanctum, his red toolbox, I hesitated. We were never even allowed to touch it. Owen flipped open the lid, and at first I saw only the familiar array: screwdrivers, pliers, a roll of electrical tape. But then he slid the top tray aside, and my heart plummeted. Beneath it lay a stack of photographs, glossy, bundled in a plastic bag held together with a rubber band. Blood pounded in my temples. The photos were of me, sleeping, in the shower. In one I was facing away from the camera in the kitchen, wearing only a robe. Some of the angles were from above, as if taken from the corner of the room. I let out a stifled cry, gasping for air. Owen flinched, his eyes wide with fear. Why was Dad doing that? I had no answer, only a chilling realization. We needed to run. Not in an hour, not tomorrow, right now. I grabbed Owen's hand and bolted for the exit. No packing, no belongings. I didn't even remember a toothbrush. I shoved my phone in my back pocket, snatched Owen's jacket from the hook in the hallway, and threw open the garage door, as if releasing all the pent-up panic in my chest. I hadn't driven in weeks. Ethan insisted on it. He kept saying I was too high-strung behind the wheel, too distracted, that it was easier for him to handle things. But my hands remembered. A tremor ran through them as I turned the key. The engine of the old Ford sighed, as if waking from a long slumber. "Buckle up, sweetie," I whispered, and Owen immediately clicked the seatbelt obediently. His face in the morning sun seemed pale and serious. We slowly, stealthily, backed out of the driveway. I didn't even glance at the neighbor's house, although I was tortured by curiosity. Had they seen anything? Did they suspect anything? It wasn't until we were a couple of blocks away that I allowed myself the first breath. The smell of the plastic bag, with the photos still lingered in my nostrils. The click of Ethan's camera shutter echoed in my ears, although I had never heard it before. "Mom, where are we going?" His voice was quiet, too quiet for a 6-year-old. "I don't know yet," I admitted, and it was the pure truth. I hadn't spoken to anyone outside of Ethan's circle in months. My last friend, Tiffany, was, according to Ethan, a real gossip, one of those people who would twist your words inside out and cause you problems. Did I believe him then? Absolutely. Every word he said. But as the car carried me away, fragments of my former life, a life outside his control, surfaced in my memory like drowned bodies. Janice. She used to babysit Owen when he was a baby. We stopped talking after Ethan said she had crossed a line by daring to suggest parenting books to me. 3 years of silence, but she lived only an hour away, and the name of the street suddenly popped into my head. With trembling hands, I steered the car onto the highway. First, I turned off my phone, then Owen's phone. "Just for now, okay? We'll turn them back on later," I mumbled, trying to sound casual. He nodded, looking at me trustingly. We drove on in oppressive silence. Halfway there, we stopped at a gas station. I paid in cash, avoiding the cameras. In the dim mirror of the restroom, I caught my reflection and barely recognized the worn-out woman. Sunken eyes, cracked lips. When did I stop taking care of myself? When did I start creeping and whispering in my own house like a criminal? I remembered the first time Ethan yelled at me. Not the loudest yell, no. The coldest. Owen had spilled a glass of orange juice on the rug. I rushed to wipe it up, mumbling apologies as if it were my fault. Ethan stood unmoving for a full minute, staring daggers at me. Then, narrowing his eyes, he spat out, "It's not about the mess. It's about you not teaching him to be more careful." His words, like icy needles, pierced my heart. They stuck in me like a barbed hook, lodged deep within. Around noon, we pulled up to the neighborhood where Janice lived. Her house, painted a cheerful yellow with bright white shutters, seemed like a small island of comfort, though the 2 pots of wilted flowers by the steps marred the overall impression. Owen tentatively reached for my hand. "Is she going to be mad?" he whispered. "I don't know," I replied, feeling my voice tremble betrayingly, "but I think she'll answer the door." I knocked twice. Silence. My heart pounded. I knocked again, this time more insistently. And then, the click of a lock. The door slowly creaked open. In the narrow gap, I saw Janice. She had aged, her hair was shorter, but her eyes were the same. I tried to speak, but the words caught in my throat. She glanced at Owen, then back at me, and without a word flung the door wide open. No questions, no accusations. She simply wrapped me in a hug so tight as if something had been longing in her chest for years and had finally been released. I didn't cry, couldn't. That part of me that knew how to cry was locked away, buried under years of tiptoeing around, afraid to make a mistake. She led us into her small but wonderfully warm living room, where sunlight streamed through the open curtains, and a patchwork quilt lay invitingly on the sofa, as if waiting for us. The scent of cinnamon and lavender gently enveloped the room, and for the first time that morning, since Ethan had left, I could breathe deeply without a heavy weight on my chest. Owen, clutching his beloved stuffed fox, sat beside me. His eyes darted around the room anxiously, as if he feared the whole thing was just a bad dream. Janice placed a cup of apple juice and some crackers in front of him. "Do you want to talk?" she asked softly, her voice like a gentle caress. I just shook my head. "Not yet." We fell into silence, broken only by the steady ticking of an old clock on the mantelpiece. Each tick echoed loudly in my head. Finally, I gathered my strength and poured out everything that had been building up inside, not just about the unfortunate toolbox, but about all the years that had led to this moment, about how Ethan made me feel worthless and then guilty for feeling that way, about how he corrected me in front of Owen and then accused me of undermining his authority when I tried to voice my opinion, about how he would take the battery out of my phone because he thought I was spending too much time on Social Spark. Janice listened without interrupting. Her face remained impassive, but I saw her fingers whiten as she gripped her mug tightly. "He isolated you," she finally said, and there was steel in her voice. "He made sure you had no one else to turn to. That's what those men do." I nodded silently, feeling lost in a raging ocean of uncertainty. "And now I have absolutely no idea what to do next." "We'll figure it out, honey," she said firmly, her eyes radiating unwavering determination. "You're not alone in this anymore." I tucked Owen into the cozy guest room and lay down beside him until his gentle breathing lulled him into a world of dreams. For the first time in weeks, I noticed the tension had disappeared from his small brow, leaving only serenity. Returning to the kitchen, I found Janice studying a yellowed manila folder intently. "My cousin works with women's shelters," she explained, without looking up. "He gave me this information just in case you ever needed—" She trailed off, her gaze filled with compassion. I sank into the chair opposite her, feeling a surge of gratitude welling up inside. I didn't even realize how much I needed this. "But you knew deep down. You just weren't ready to admit it. But you are now." Her voice was full of confidence. I took her hand in mine and squeezed it tightly, unable to find the words to express my appreciation. Then I made a fatal mistake. I turned on my phone. The screen lit up, and a moment later a message appeared. "Where are you, Olivia?" No name, no number, just those 4 words, like icy needles, piercing my heart. My breath caught in my throat, and an icy fear settled in my chest. Before I could recover, a second message arrived. "You're scaring Owen. Come home." I hastily switched off the phone, but it was too late. I could feel it in every cell of my body. He knew, and now the hunt had begun. I stared at the lifeless screen of the phone as if it were a snake ready to spew out deadly venom at any moment. Just 2 messages, and I was once again overwhelmed by that soul-chilling panic that I thought I had finally escaped. Janice carefully picked up my phone and placed it face down on the kitchen table. Her eyes showed concern. "He was tracking you?" she asked, her voice filled with worry. I nodded slowly, feeling a lump forming in my throat. "I don't know. Maybe he always knew where I was, even when I didn't tell him. He often said I was too predictable." Janice frowned, and I saw a tension in her jaw that I hadn't noticed before. "We need to assume your phone is compromised," she said, trying to remain calm, but I could see her knuckles turning white. "He could have installed spyware on it, on Owen's tablet, or even in the car." I felt like I had been doused with ice water. How could I have been so blind? Guilt burned inside me. But Janice didn't reproach me. She simply stood up resolutely and began gathering things. Her car keys, her phone, a backpack from the hallway closet. "Let's go," she said, her voice full of determination. "We're not going to sit here and wait for him to find us." She drove us to a public library a couple of towns away. There, under the monotonous hum of fluorescent lights, she worked diligently at a computer, searching for information about safe houses and legal aid. Every movement of hers conveyed anxiety and a determination to protect us. Janice printed out a stack of pages filled with the names of nonprofit organizations providing legal assistance and support to trauma survivors. "I'll drive you anywhere," she said, her voice resolute, "but you're making the calls." Those words stuck with me. For the first time in years, someone wasn't trying to bandage my wounds or silence me. Janice was handing me the tools, but trusting me to hold the hammer. That day, while Owen slept peacefully in the back seat of her car, I dialed a number with trembling fingers at a payphone outside a roadside diner, calling a shelter whose address was listed as strictly confidential. The woman on the other end of the line had a calm, empathetic voice. She didn't pry into why I was running. She only asked if I was safe, if my son was with me, and if I had a way to get to them. By evening, we had clear instructions: arrive at the city park before sunset and wait on the west bench. No calls, no messages. We followed the directions without question. At the park, we were met by a woman named Denise wearing a baseball cap and carrying a large reusable bag. She didn't introduce herself. She simply walked up and quietly asked, "Are you Olivia?" And when I nodded timidly, her face broke into a genuine smile. "Great, I'm here now, and I'm going to help you." Denise's car, an unremarkable dark blue sedan, slightly covered in road dust, was waiting for us at the curb. She didn't say a word as I settled Owen into the back seat and fastened his seatbelt. The shelter turned out to be a converted house with a pristine white porch and reassuring locks on the doors. Inside, there was a scent of lemon freshness and homemade baking, creating an atmosphere of warmth and comfort. Denise led us to a room at the back of the house. It contained 2 narrow beds and an old dresser. "You'll be safe here," she assured us in a quiet but confident voice. "Phones must be turned off. No social media, no contact with people you don't trust completely." I nodded again, feeling the tension gradually leaving me. For the first time in a long time, I fell into a real sleep, deep and peaceful, without the constant sense of danger. But peaceful respite always seems too short when you live in survival mode. The next morning, as Owen devoured cereal at the communal table with the other children, Denise gently knocked on our door. Her eyes showed concern. "We need to talk," she said, lowering her voice. "Your husband has filed a missing persons report." I felt my legs buckle. "What does that mean?" I whispered, grabbing the doorframe. "It means he's putting on a show, pretending to be a loving and worried husband." Her voice dripped with contempt. Typical behavior for men like that, she stated. Here, if the police find us, we'll be safe. But you need to start thinking about the future, about possibilities. The future. I had been living one day at a time, a day of escape, and now I needed to make plans. The next day, Denise led me to a secluded room where soft twilight reigned and thick walls absorbed the sounds. She handed me a notebook and a pen. Start writing everything down, she advised. Every incident, every word you remember, starting from the moment he first raised his voice at you, up to the last message. This isn't for a court case. It's to get everything out of you, to free your mind. I hesitated, my hands froze above the blank page. Where do you even begin when the pain is buried so deep that you almost forget it's there? I started with, the first time Ethan made me feel crazy was on our honeymoon. And then the words poured out, like a dam had broken. The night he turned off the air conditioning in the August heat and convinced me I was imagining it. The time he deleted texts from my sister and said she must have stopped replying, the disapproval that flashed in his eyes when I put on makeup he didn't like. Desperate, he'd whisper, like it was my name. He systematically cut me off from every woman who tried to open my eyes. I filled 3 pages before I came to. Denise peeked into the room and gave me an encouraging nod. Keep going. You're finding your voice. Owen was settling into the shelter quickly. The other kids accepted him, and the volunteers knew how to handle kids like him, kids who had learned to tiptoe around their fathers. But I saw the signs. He flinched at loud noises, asked permission before speaking, and slept with a nightlight on. One night I found a drawing in his bed, done in crayon. It was our old house, but the windows were blacked out, and there was a small figure of me standing in the corner near the door. Owen had drawn himself outside, holding my hand, with a big arrow pointing to us and the word, safe. I clutched the drawing to my chest and finally let myself break. Finally, I allowed myself to cry, the tears I'd been swallowing for years. Later that week, Denise set up a meeting with Carla, a lawyer from Legal Aid. Carla was sharp and no-nonsense, with reading glasses perched on her nose, which she tapped thoughtfully as she seemed to weigh every word. I've seen men like your husband before, she said, her gaze hardening. They appear to be model citizens, but their charm is a weapon. The missing persons report isn't about concern. It's about control. If we don't move fast enough, he could turn this around on you, accuse you of abandonment, and use it in family court. Family court? The word sent a chill down my spine. He could try to get an emergency custody order, Carla continued, claiming you're unstable, that you fled with your son, and that he fears for Owen's safety. He's never shown that kind of concern for Owen, I whispered, feeling a knot of despair tighten in my stomach. Carla leaned forward, her eyes burning with determination. That won't stop him from pretending to be a concerned father. All he needs is a judge who doesn't know the truth. And so we began. I handed over the photos I had snatched from the toolbox. I wrote down every memory, every detail I could recall to prove my case and protect my son. Denise helped me dredge up the horrific events, like Ethan humiliating me in front of everyone as if I were invisible, how he pulled Owen's strings, making him anxious about my disapproval. We worked to gather evidence. Denise also helped me draft an application for an emergency protection order. There were no guarantees that a judge would approve it. They would have to believe our case. What if he finds us first? I asked, my voice trembling with fear. Denise's face clouded with concern. There have been cases where women have disappeared before the paperwork goes through, she said quietly, but you're smarter than that. And this time, you're not alone. Sleep eluded me that night. I held Owen tighter, listening to the muffled hum of the lights in the hallway of the shelter. Somewhere out there, in the darkness, Ethan was likely plotting. But I wasn't standing still either. I was preparing for a fight. 3 long days passed before the call came. Denise knocked softly on the door and handed me an envelope. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, stamped with the seal of the county. The emergency protection order had been approved. For the next 30 days, Ethan was legally prohibited from coming near me or Owen, let alone having any contact. I stared at the paper as if it were the greatest miracle ever bestowed upon me, It wasn't a cure-all, and it wouldn't stop him if he really wanted to find us, but it was something. The first official acknowledgement, not from a friend, not from a counselor, but from the system itself, that I was finally being believed. I raced over to Carla's office that day, beaming with hope. She quickly scanned the document and nodded approvingly. Excellent. Now, let's use this momentum. We immediately discussed the next steps. Filing for sole custody, requesting a long-term protection order, preparing for Ethan's next move because he would inevitably make one. Carla knew it, Denise knew it, and despite the thin veneer of optimism, I knew it too. But there were moments, tiny glimmers of light, piercing through the darkness. One morning, Owen ran up to me, a ladybug perched on his finger, his face beaming with pure joy. Another time, he drew a portrait of me in a cape, and signed it, Mom, Safe Hero. These small things became my oxygen, my salvation. I started attending group sessions at the shelter, seeking support and comfort among those who understood my pain. In this circle of women, each carried her own cross. Some stories were more bitter than mine, others quiet, imperceptible, like shadows creeping under the threshold of consciousness until they closed like a deadly noose around the neck. Belle, for example, lived with a tyrannical husband who controlled every degree in the house, punishing her with icy cold. Marcy, broken by the words of her partner, who convinced her that with 3 children and a face like hers, no one would want her. Over coffee, we shared not only our fears, but also our survival experiences. People think violence is bruises, Belle once uttered, but most of it is silence, invisible until it consumes you from the inside. I nodded silently, understanding her words, with a pain that resonated deep within. Not even a week had passed when I received a disturbing call from Carla. Her voice was sharp and abrupt. He filed... My mouth instantly went dry. For what? For an emergency temporary custody order. Claims you're mentally unstable, that you kidnapped Owen, that he fears for his son's safety. The hearing is scheduled for Friday. We had only 3 days left. Will they believe him? I whispered, feeling the ground slipping away beneath my feet. Possibly. He has a clean reputation. You have no solid evidence other than photos, and the judge assigned to the case is known for his commitment to joint custody, even in cases of serious conflict. I collapsed onto the bed and the room swam before my eyes. But what can we do? I whispered. We'll fight, Olivia. We'll prepare for war. I'm preparing a response, attaching all the photos and your written statement. We'll demand a personal hearing and you'll testify. You'll tell the judge everything down to the smallest detail. I felt like I had been doused with ice water. I hadn't seen Ethan since that fateful morning when he left. Will I have to be in the same room with him? My voice trembled. Yes, but you won't be alone, honey. Denise didn't leave my side. That same evening, Carla organized a mock hearing. They taught me how to speak, where to look, how to answer questions without losing my composure. And then, just before the end, Carla said words I never expected to hear. She leaned towards me, her gaze piercing. Olivia, I know this is awful, but you need to understand something. Very clearly. There was steel in her voice. He no longer controls you. That's why he's so desperately trying to. He feels you slipping away, that the power is leaving his hands. I took a deep breath, and for the first time during this entire nightmare, I felt not just the desire to survive, but the readiness for a real battle. The courthouse greeted me with coldness, not physical, no, the coldness of indifference, apathy, a premonition of something sinister. The courtroom was oppressive in its sterility, steel benches, beige walls, and a judge whose face seemed frozen in a mask of impassivity. Ethan, as if preparing for a funeral, was dressed in an impeccable dark gray suit. The tie, the epitome of modesty, the shoes, a mirror reflection of hope for favor. Next to him, his lawyer, a woman with hair polished to a shine, and a stack of documents that made my stomach churn with nausea at the mere sight of them. When Ethan entered and our eyes met, he didn't even flinch. Only a pathetic, almost guilty smile flickered across his lips, as if we were about to discuss an unfortunate mistake over coffee. I shuddered. Carla, sensing my tension, touched my hand, her fingers squeezing my forearm. "Hold on," she whispered. "Don't let him break you with this spectacle." The judge called for order, and Ethan's lawyer, like a skilled puppeteer, began to weave her web of lies. She painted Ethan as a victim, a devoted father, blinded by the sudden flight of his wife, unemployed, penniless, and with a history of emotional instability. With particular emphasis, she spoke of Owen's interrupted education, the trauma caused by separation from his family, the urgent need to restore stability. This word, like an icy blade, pierced me, echoing a threat in every bone. It was Carla's turn, and she acted with cold, calculated precision. She presented the restraining order to the court like a trump card. Then, the hidden, insidious photos taken by Ethan, capturing me defenseless and unsuspecting. She read excerpts from my statement, and each word echoed with pain. Finally, the judge turned his gaze to me. "Mrs. Sterling, you have the floor." My legs buckled as I stood up. I couldn't look at Ethan. I just couldn't. "I'm not mentally unstable," I began, my voice betraying me with a tremor. "I left because I was afraid. Afraid not only for myself, but also for my son. He never laid a hand on me, that's true, but he hurt me. Every single day." I continued, recounting the photos, the gaslighting, the total control, how I had dissolved into this nightmare until I had forgotten the sound of my own laughter. In the judge's eyes, I caught a flicker of something akin to understanding, but his face remained impassive. And then Ethan spoke. He stood with his hands clasped in front of him, in a pose of remorse, and delivered rehearsed, carefully chosen words. He regretted any pain I had felt. He only wanted to support me on my journey to mental wellness. He missed his son terribly. Every word was a lie, masked with concern and sympathy. And then he burst into tears. I don't know how he managed it, but 2 perfectly round teardrops rolled down his cheeks, just like at our wedding when he told the story of how we met, and everyone around us cooed, thinking he was the most charming man in the world. For a moment, I thought the judge faltered, but he immediately stated, "Temporary custody of the child remains with Mrs. Sterling, pending a full hearing in 2 weeks. The child's current residence is deemed stable. Mr. Sterling is allowed supervised visitation with the child as arranged with the court." I saw Ethan clench his jaw. It lasted only a moment, but I caught a glimpse of the crack in his flawless facade. Leaving the courtroom, Carla pulled me aside. "You did the right thing," she said. "You told the truth. In these cases, that's harder than it seems." But I felt no relief. After all, Ethan had only lost the first round, and men like him don't give up without a fight. That evening, back at the shelter, I tucked Owen into bed and lingered by his crib. He seemed so serene, as if the tumultuous day had not touched him, but I knew that wasn't true. I gently touched his forehead with my lips, whispering, "Whatever happens, we'll get through this." The words sounded confident, but inside me, anxiety festered. Ethan was still free, and I knew in my gut that this was not the end. The first supervised visit was scheduled just 3 days after the hearing. A neutral family center, overseen by social services, became the location for our meeting. The pale yellow walls of the room, the plastic furniture, and the huge one-way mirror, behind which observers were surely hidden, created an oppressive atmosphere. Owen clung to me like a little kitten as we pulled up. I knelt down, stroking his soft hair. "You don't have to hug him or talk to him if you don't want to, sweetie," I whispered. "Just be yourself. I'll be waiting for you here when it's over." He nodded, his lips pressed tightly together, as if trying to swallow an impossibly large lump. Ethan arrived 10 minutes late, not enough to be penalized, but enough to demonstrate his contempt. As soon as Owen came into view, Ethan's face broke into a smile. "Well, if it isn't my little champ," he exclaimed, opening his arms for a hug. "How I've missed you, buddy." But Owen stood frozen, his gaze fixed on the floor. For a moment, Ethan's smile faltered, but it quickly returned, becoming unnatural, strained. The session lasted agonizingly long, Exactly 45 minutes. I watched from afar, my heart pounding. Ethan employed his entire arsenal: jokes, gifts, shared memories. At one point, he even cried, his trembling hands producing an old photograph of the three of us on a trip to the beach 2 years ago. But Owen remained impassive. No laughter, no smile. When it was over, he ran into my arms without a word. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "He smells like our house." I held him tightly, feeling the salty moisture of tears soak into my sweater. That evening, Denise, seeing my state, suggested we talk. "I feel terrible," I confessed. "Like I'm punishing Owen by making him go through this." "You're not punishing him," Denise gently countered. "You're letting him know that he has a choice, that love isn't fear and violence. That's more than most kids in his position ever get." I nodded, understanding her words, but the guilt had seeped into me like sticky, wet clothes that are impossible to shed. 2 days later, I received an envelope from Ethan's lawyer. Inside was a letter, not an official, dry legal notice, but a living personal message. It began with the chilling words, "Olivia, I don't even recognize you anymore." He poured out his heart, describing how desperately he was trying to get his life back on track, how he longed for his family, how he was willing to forget everything if only I would come home. Forgive, as if I had committed an unforgivable sin by running away from him. In his eyes, the shelter was a breeding ground for evil, Janice a cunning temptress doing the brainwashing, and Owen, apparently, needed a normal life. Finally, he dropped an icy statement. "If you think I'm going to give up on my son, you're dead wrong. I always finish what I start." Denise, after reading the letter, immediately snatched it from my hands. "He's crossed the line again, trying to make direct contact. That's a direct violation of the restraining order." Carla immediately filed a report. At the shelter, I was moved to another room, and Owen was moved to a different group during playtime. We lived on pins and needles. Every rustle outside the door made my heart pound, and an icy fear settled in my stomach. But we didn't give up. We moved forward, step by step. Owen began seeing a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma. At first, he was silent as a fish, but after a couple of sessions, he suddenly asked the counselor timidly, are they real?" She tilted her head and asked sympathetically, "What kind of monsters, Owen?" "You know, there are people who smile at you to your face, but still manage to make you feel like you're always wrong," he said, and there was bitterness in his voice. When she told me everything, I just fell apart, not only from the pain, but also from some kind of wild pride for her. He, like me, seemed to be finding his voice again, reclaiming it from silence. Just a couple of evenings later, a call came from Carla, and the news was disheartening. Ethan had filed a second emergency motion. He claimed that the supervised visit went horribly because of my manipulations, that Owen, in his words, was being literally trained, and now he was demanding full access to his son without any supervision. "He's deliberately escalating things," Carla said anxiously, "but now we won't back down either." I had exactly 1 week until the next hearing, 7 days to prepare, 7 days to prove that a child's safety is not just a right, but a real battle, and I was finally ready for it. The week before, the hearing passed in a haze, woven from piles of papers, endless phone calls, and moments when I felt detached from what was happening. Owen was drawing more than usual. His drawings showed trees, keys, and houses with doors covered in locks. He silently handed me each drawing, and it seemed like we were creating our own secret language, understood only by the two of us. In these childish scribbles, a desperate plea for protection screamed out, and I felt a growing determination to fight for his safety to the end with each new drawing. Every night, as if preparing for battle, I honed my answers with Carla. She transformed into Ethan, his lawyer, ruthless and icy. Her questions stung like snakes. "Why didn't you go to the police sooner? Are you trying to deprive the child of his father? Have you always acted in the best interests of your son?" With each answer, I felt a steel rod strengthen within me. I became quieter, but gained an unbending confidence that I never knew I had. The night before the hearing, sleep fled from me like from fire. I stood in the shelter's communal kitchen, staring into the inky void outside the window. In my head, Ethan's voice echoed, his tone when he was dissatisfied, when the towels weren't folded the way he liked, when dinner was late by a meager 10 minutes, when my laughter, apparently, was too loud. In the silence, I whispered with my lips, "You won't win anymore, not this time, never again." This time, the courtroom seemed smaller, quieter, as if it had shrunk to accommodate only us. The walls still smelled of dust and cold paper. Ethan was already there when I entered. His lawyer was whispering something to him, leaning in close. This time, he didn't even look at me, didn't give me his fake smile. Maybe he knew. Maybe he sensed that the scales had tipped the other way. Carla leaned forward, her voice soft and persuasive. "Just tell the truth, that's all. The hardest part is behind you. You left." The doors swung open, and the judge entered the room. The hearing began. Ethan, his lawyer, unleashed a torrent of words about parental rights, about how the boy needed a father, about stability, about structure, about redemption. But this time, there were no tears in his voice, only a measured, rehearsed silence, a chilling emptiness. It was my turn. I stood up, and the world around me seemed to fade. Gathering my courage, I began, "I'm not here to hurt anyone. I'm here because my son deserves a happy and safe childhood where there is no room for fear." My voice trembled as I began to talk about the toolbox, about the photographs, about the quiet, methodical cruelty he subjected me to, about how Ethan made me feel like I was disappearing, dissolving into pieces, until my son became the only thread connecting me to reality. I read aloud an excerpt from therapist Owen's written statement. Owen is exhibiting classic trauma responses indicative of prolonged emotional distress and coercive control within the home. As I sat down, Carla gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. The judge announced a 40-minute recess. We went out into the hallway and began pacing back and forth, unable to settle ourselves. Denise appeared as well, standing off to the side with her arms crossed, as if shielding me from what was happening with an invisible wall. Soon the bailiff returned, and we were back in the courtroom. The judge was brief, but every word he spoke felt like a hammer blow. Custody remains with Ms. Sterling. Mr. Sterling is prohibited from approaching his son until court-appointed psychologists have completed a comprehensive evaluation. And yes, a long-term restraining order is issued.